We're gonna go ahead and replace our timing belt and water pump. It's located on the front side of your engine, up underneath the wheel well here, underneath this cover. Let's go ahead and locate our radiator cap right here underneath the hood. Let's go ahead and twist this. Open this up. Pop this off and set it aside. Now, with the vehicle raised up off the ground, there's normally a plastic cover right underneath the front of the bumper. You can use a trim tool or a small blade screwdriver to go ahead and pry it up underneath, or it actually pops from the top and it will hang down here. The purpose of this here is you want to go ahead and access the drain coolant plug on the bottom side of your radiator up through here, and coolant is going to come down. So at this point here, go ahead and grab a drain bucket or a catch can to catch that coolant that is going to drain out of the radiator. Now, you're viewing this from the passenger side wheel well area, and here, right here, is our radiator drain plug. And what we're going to do is, normally you can reach up here and grab this and twist it. I'm able to do this here, but if you can't, you can use a pair of pliers to reach up in here. You want to turn this counterclockwise and drain it. Don't forget to have your drain can or catch can underneath. Let's go ahead and open this up. Let's go ahead and install our drain plug here. Now, the reason why we open up the radiator cap was that helps with a rapid drain. There's no vacuum put on the system. So once we open up this cap, you could clearly see that it drained out quickly. And we'll go ahead and make sure that that is snug. And then we're just gonna go ahead and wipe things down from all that residual coolant. With our radiator drained and plugged off on the bottom, we can now go ahead and install our radiator cap. It's good to remove our engine cover here. On the front are two little plastic locking buttons. You can use a flathead screwdriver. Simply go in, turn those there, about a quarter turn. That should unlock those. That allows us to simply pull up, pull this off. And on the back side, you're just gonna have those little rubber grommets here that are holding this in. So just pop that off and set it aside. Let's go ahead and remove our serpentine belt. And on the bottom here, we have a tensioner between our harmonic balancer and our AC compressor right here. And what we're gonna do is put a 19mm socket on here, and we're gonna slowly turn this counterclockwise. This is gonna compress the shock here, or this little unit right here, and then we'll remove that belt. Now you want to do this slowly, and we'll compress that. Okay, to remove that belt, and then we can release that tensioner nice and slow. A little tip for you right now: before you remove your serpentine belt from all of your pulleys, now's the perfect time to sketch it or take a picture of it with your phone. That way there, when it comes time for reinstallation, you know exactly what pulley goes around. Now, from underneath the hood, I want to go ahead and loosen and remove our expansion tank here. We're just going to give it a good tug or bump upward and pop it out of its bracket. Pop that up, slide that off to the side. We're going to go ahead and unbolt our power steering pump here. There's two bolts holding it. There's one on the back side here. It's a 12mm, and then there's one on the bottom side. It's a 12mm. I'm going to go ahead and loosen and remove both of those bolts. Now, our lower bolt here for the power steering pump is right over here. That is a 12mm. That's our bottom one that we want to go ahead and get to. And then we're going to go ahead and get to the other one up on the other side. Once we get this loose, we'll go ahead and pull out that bolt. On the back side here, we'll get to our 12mm bolt. Once that's loose, we should be able to just kind of float that power steering pump a little bit, tugging it around And we'll spin that bolt out. And there we have it. Right above the power steering pump, we have our AC line here, and there's a bracket right here. It's a 10mm bolt holding this bracket. What we're gonna do is loosen this, spin that bolt out. That's just gonna allow for us to have a little bit more flexibility to move the AC line out of the way a little bit and pull that pump up to the side so we have more room to work. Just gonna go ahead and throw this bolt back in here. Go ahead and pull that up a little bit. We have a power steering reservoir right here in this little metal retaining tab. Just gonna pry that out and wiggle this up. I'm gonna pop that off for now, just to let that float right there. What we're gonna do here is we decided to disconnect the hose from the pump to the reservoir itself. Normally don't like to do that, however, it is gonna be the best way to do this in this case. We're gonna open up this reservoir cap, and we're gonna use our vacuum tool here. Go ahead and put this into another container here, and we're just gonna do this until we can empty out that power steering pump or the reservoir itself. I'm gonna go ahead and put our reservoir cap back on. Now I'm gonna use a pair of pliers on this end over here. I also wanna set up a couple catch rags here, catch any residual that might be coming out from the power steering hose there. Slide the clamp back. Let's go ahead and grab our hose here. I'm going to twist that off of the reservoir. Pop up the hose here, just going to prop that up. Tilt it up so that any of the residual fluid doesn't spill out. Let's go ahead and take the hose off of our power steering pump here. Now this is going to have fluid all the way up to the top of the neck here. So you want to be careful when you're lifting this up. You keep that as the highest point. Go ahead and work that pump up and out. Using a 17mm wrench, I'm gonna go ahead and loosen this here. We would like to use a ratchet in here, we just can't fit it. So that's why we're using a wrench and doing this by hand. Now before we remove this here completely, I'm just gonna loosen this up quite a bit. Now we're gonna move down to our hydraulic tensioner down below and unbolt that. We're going to remove this 12mm bolt right here on the bottom side of our hydraulic piston here. Remove that bolt and this should be loose. Now with the hydraulic tensioner disconnected, we can continue removing this bolt. Now that we have our bolt loose, we can go ahead and remove our tensioner. Now we have our Honda tool inside our harmonic balancer, and we have a breaker bar on there. We're gonna use a 19mm socket. We're gonna loosen the bolt holding the harmonic balancer to the crankshaft. Now our impact gun wasn't working, so we switched over to a breaker bar. Let's see if we can get this to loosen up for us. All right, we got our bolt loose now. All right, let's go ahead and remove the harmonic balancer bolt. Then switch over to our ratchet, spin that here. We're going to go ahead and pull off our harmonic balancer, but what you want to pay attention to is right here, there's a square little key, and this key can fall out when you move the harmonic balancer. So you want to be very, very careful of that. It is critical to the operation and the reassembly. Go ahead and walk that pulley back and forth, slide that off. And in this case here, the key is staying in place, but you can pull it out and remove it if you have to. We're going to now remove our upper cam cover here, and there are 5 bolts holding this in place. There's one down the bottom here, one right here, there's one on the outside, one up top here, and then one forward mounted here. These are all 10 millimeter. Let's go ahead, loosen and remove those. Go ahead and grab your cover, gently lift and pop that up and lift it out. On the back side of your covers here, there's going to be a rubber seal. You want to pay attention to this here. If it is pulling out, torn, damaged in any form or fashion, you definitely want to go ahead and replace those upon reassembly. Now on the back side cover here, we're going to do the same procedure. We're going to remove the 10 millimeter bolts running around the perimeter of it here. Now on the back side, there is a wiring harness. I want to go ahead and pluck this out. Let's go ahead and remove those bolts. Once we have all those bolts out, this should pop forward. And just kind of work that out from behind that harness and set that cover aside. We're going to go ahead and remove our lower timing cover here. There's a few bolts here. There's a 10 millimeter up on the upper left. Here, 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 here. There's one on the upper right and one dead center. Let's go ahead and loosen and remove all of those. Once we have all of our bolts out, we should be able to grab this cover and gently pry out. You want to be careful with the rubber seal that's in the back side of it here. Work this down and out. On the back side of your lower cover, you're going to have a rubber seal that goes around the perimeter. You want to go ahead and carefully inspect that, see if there's any damage or tears in it. If there are, now's the time you want to go ahead and replace it. Ours look pretty good. We're just going to wipe everything down and we'll go ahead and reuse those gaskets. Now on our crankshaft here, we have a washer right here. We're going to slide this off, and that is keyed as well, so it can only go on one way. I'm going to remove that, set it aside. Now what you want to pay attention to is on our lower crank pulley here, there is, right in line with the keyway, there is a dimple or a mark on our lower crankshaft on a pulley here. And we want to make sure that when we crank this here, this dot should line up with the arrow right here in our casting. Now ours is not lined up, so we're going to put our bolt in and we're going to crank this clockwise. You do not want to go backwards, because at that point there, you can release some of the tension on the belt. It can skip a tooth, and then when you go to start the vehicle, you're going to damage valves. It's going to be a much bigger issue. So at this point here, install your harmonic balancer bolt. We're going to thread that in as far as we can. It's going to get tight. Then we're going to use our 19 millimeter socket and a ratchet, and we're going to slowly rotate the engine until that dimple lines up with this arrow pointing down. Once this is lined up, we're going to go back up top and double check the markings on the cam. The marking on the cam should line up with the arrow on the side of the head. And if those are not lined up, we're going to rotate this another 360 degrees around and match those up. We're going to keep on doing this until this lines up, as well as both cam gears up top. mark right here is lined up right with that arrow, which is absolutely perfect. We're gonna double check up top. If that's off, we're gonna rotate this around another 360 degrees. If the cam gears line up with the markings on the head, we are perfect and ready to continue. Now on the top side here, we have a 10mm bolt. Gonna remove that, and this is for that harness bracket right there. Once we get that out, we're gonna go ahead and we wanna remove these two bolts here. These should be 14mm bolts. But before we remove those, we're gonna put our jack underneath with a block of wood and support the engine, as this is part of our motor mount assembly. And we're going to put it up on the bottom side of our oil pan. Now, we're not gonna lift the vehicle. We simply want to support the engine. So just put some tension on that. And let's go back up top. Going to remove those bolts. So the 3 bolts on this bracket here on the bottom side of our mount, there's this one right here. The other 2 are pretty tough to get to. They're going to be up top here. We're going to try and creep up here. There's one right here. And then over to the right, inside this hole, there is another one. So we're going to put a socket inside that one there. All 3 of these are 14mm. So let's go ahead and remove these 3 bolts, and then this whole unit should be able to get pulled out from the bottom and out. All right, now we have that bolt loose. We should be able to go ahead and manipulate this component down and out. Now at this point here, we already have our belt clamped on both cams up top, as well as we have our lower belt marked on the crank pulley there. So now I want to go ahead and remove these 2 10mm bolts. This is a hydraulic tensioner, and it is under pressure. So what we're going to do is loosen and remove. We're going to loosen them both, and then we're going to remove one bolt. This will snap, it'll pop out, and then we'll go ahead and remove the other bolt completely. I'm going to remove that other bolt here. And remove the tensioner. Now on the bottom side of our crank area here, right where the belt is located, there's going to be a guide plate right here. There's 2 10mm nuts holding that on. Let's go ahead and remove those and remove the plate. Once you have those off, you can pop this plate right off. And you can pull the belt off as well. Let's go ahead and remove our 14mm bolt holding the tensioner right here. So we're gonna pop one up there with a gear wrench. Break that free. Once that bolt is loose, chances are you can reach up there and just spin it out by hand. We're going to remove our idler pulley right here. It's a 14mm bolt. I'm going to use our socket and ratchet for that. I'm going to go ahead and pull our clips off up top, and we're going to remove our belt. Take our belt up off of our cam gear, off of our water pump, and off the other cam, and we'll remove that belt. Now we put our catch can underneath our engine here. We're gonna go ahead and remove our water pump, and there are 5 10mm bolts holding this in position. When we loosen this here, there will be coolant in the engine, so you wanna be prepared for that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to loosen the bottom ones. And just work my way around the perimeter, just breaking these free. We can see we got some coolant leaking already. I'm gonna go ahead and just try and pry this a little bit, just to try and open that up a little bit more. So at this point here, we have drained out our water pump. Just gonna remove the bolts here. And then we'll pop that water pump off, and we're gonna clean everything up. I'm gonna go ahead and wipe everything down. Make sure that our surface for our water pump is nice and clean. Wipe down any residual coolant. It's kind of just sitting around. Always good to work with a clean, fresh start. On the back side of our water pump here is going to be an O-ring gasket or gasket seal here. And basically you just want to kind of press that in. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and install this here. I'm going to install our 5 bolts. Let's go ahead and feed our water pump up and into place. Once we have that up, let's go ahead and start getting our bolts in. We got all 5 of them started, and then we'll snug them down. Let's go ahead and torque these bolts down to 8.9 foot-pounds. And repeat this for all 5. Now we have our idler bearing right here, and on the back side we have this little shim, and it says out, so you want to make sure that this shim faces outward on the back side. We clean up the threads on our bolt, put a little bit of blue Loctite on there, and then go ahead and install it onto your engine. Once you have the bolt threads caught, let's go ahead and zip that down. Let's go ahead and torque this down to 33 foot-pounds. And we have our tensioners and pulley here. I want to go ahead and take our old one and pull the sleeve out of the back side. You can slide this over. Let's go ahead and install our tensioner here. Place our tensioner up top here. Let's go ahead and get that bolt caught a couple threads. And it's pretty easy going in, so I'm just going to spin that in by hand as far as I can. Go ahead and snug this down. Let's go ahead and torque down our tensioner bolt here to 19 foot-pounds. Let's go ahead and install our hydraulic tensioner here Gonna line this up. Get one of our bolts started in the engine, and then we'll go ahead and get the other one started. Okay, let's get those tightened down. Get torque down these bolts to 8.9 foot-pounds. So we're going to go ahead and install our lower belt first. Get this onto our gear. And with that in place, let's go ahead and put on our little guide here. Little guide bracket. There's two 10mm nuts. Just gonna spin those down. Get both of those. I'm gonna thread these on as far as I can by hand. We'll come back and tighten those down later on. But this is gonna hold the belt onto the lower crank gear. Now when we run the belt here, we're going to start from here. We're going to go up around our idler pulley here, and we're going to go up the right side of the engine. We're going to go around the idler, up and over our forward cam gear. Then we're going to route that down underneath our water pump pulley, back up over our rear bank cam gear, down around our tensioner pulley, and we'll pretty much have our belt installed at that point there. So let's go ahead and start feeding our belt upward, and at least in the direction it needs to go. So we went ahead and ran our belt up around our front cam gear, and it didn't line up quite right. So what we did was we went down to the crank gear down below, and we turned it back. We turned it counterclockwise about a half a tooth. Just a very small amount. And then we put our belt on, and the belt lined up absolutely perfect. We ran it down around our water pump, back up around our rear cam gear. We brought it down, put it on our tensioner, and everything else just lined up. At that point there, we went back down to our crank bolt, down to our crank gear here, and we turned it that half a tooth forward, and the belt is nice and taut the way it should be. Now the guide plate for our belt here is going to be torqued to 8.9 foot-pounds. I'm gonna go ahead and pull that pin out. And our belt is nice and tight. So at this point here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna double check our markings. We're gonna go ahead and mark the bottom one more time, or our top with the arrow, and we're gonna crank this over manually, and then we're gonna double check all of our markings, making sure that our belt is exactly where it needs to be. At that point there, we can go ahead and begin or continue our reassembly. Now, in double checking the belt placement itself, what you wanna do is go ahead and use your 19mm socket and your extension and your half-inch drive ratchet, and you go ahead and crank over the engine by hand. What you're gonna do is you're gonna rotate this crank gear 2 full revolutions. 1, 2. Then you're gonna line this up with this upper arrow, make sure that's in line. Then double check up top and make sure that the cam gear on both rear and front cam is lined up at 12 o'clock on both sides, lined up with the markings on the head itself. Once you're all set, now we'll go ahead and continue with our installation. Now at this point here, we went ahead and we broke our lower crank bolt loose. Let's go ahead and spin this out. Go ahead and set that aside. I'm going to go ahead and install the motor side of our motor mount. Just gonna set that up in place. I'm gonna get our lower bolt started first, because that's gonna help hold us up right there. And get that started a few threads. And get that rearward bolt started in there. And once that's started, we'll go ahead and put our socket and ratchet on the forward mounted bolt. With all three of these tight, let's go ahead and install our lower timing cover. Go ahead and get our cover up here. We've already checked our gaskets, made sure everything was good. Now, if you needed to replace gaskets, now's the time to do it. I'm gonna go ahead and get some of these bolts started by hand. And once we get all these started, we're gonna come back and snug them all down. Let's go ahead and snug down our bolts. Let's go ahead and lower down our mount bolts here. At this point, we're going to go ahead and put our jack underneath the oil pan again and raise up that motor just that little bit. Then we'll go ahead and tighten those down. We also want to go ahead and get our rear bolt installed right here. Let's go ahead and make sure that our seal is in properly on the back of our cover. Everything is good. Let's go ahead and work our cover back in. Line this up. With our cover lined up, we can go ahead and start installing all of our bolts. Now that we have all the bolts in here, let's go ahead and snug them down. Once we have all those tight, we'll just press the wiring harness into the rear lip here. It's just a harness retainer on that cover. Now let's go ahead and repeat the same process for the front cover. Let's go ahead and line up our tensioner here. Let's go ahead and get that bolt started. All right, snug that down. And once that bottom's out, just give it a little bit more. You're gonna install the harmonic balancer shim here. Line up the keyway with your harmonic balancer. Slide that into place. Apply a little bit of grease to the threads on your harmonic balancer bolt. And let's go ahead and tighten that down. Once this bolt is bottomed out, you can snug it up, and then we'll torque it down. Now we're going to go ahead and torque down our harmonic balancer bolt to 47 foot-pounds. Now the next thing we want to do is, now that this is torqued down to 47 foot-pounds, we have to tighten down this bolt an additional 60 degrees. Now if you have a torque wrench that helps you out with that, fantastic. You can go ahead and set it to that 60 degrees. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and do a basic marking on this here, and let's go ahead and get that set up. So at 60 degrees, this is at 12 o'clock, is lined up with here. This is going to be our 60-degree mark, so we have to get this facing this. So we're going to tighten this down until this yellow mark matches up with that. That'll be our 60-degree point. We're just about there, just a little bit more. And there we have it. Here's our 60 degrees. All right, let's go ahead and bring our power steering pump down into position. At this point here, we have our plug and our hose. We're going to go ahead and pop that out. We'll run this underneath. We can go ahead and reconnect that to our reservoir right here. I'm just going to pop that in there for now. Let's go ahead and line up a power steering pump. We're going to start by getting our rearward bolt installed first. That's the easiest one to get to. I'm going to reach down underneath, get that lower bolt started. That one's a little bit tougher to get to. You might be able to use a socket or something if you can't fit your hand in there. All right, go ahead and snug that bolt down. Make sure that bottom one is just as tight. Let's go ahead and feed our belt down, down, and down. So this belt is going to run over, the upper part of the belt runs over to your alternator. The lower part of the belt runs around the back side of this tensioner here. On the upper belt, I'm actually going to put a little clip on here. This is just going to hold the belt on the upper portion here so we can go down below and continue running that belt. Okay, so this belt is going to come down. It's going to run around our harmonic balancer. Runs around the AC compressor to our tensioner here, and then it runs around to our alternator. So at this point here, we're going to go ahead and compress this tensioner and then pull our belt up and over. Now once you have your belt on, you want to go ahead and make sure that the belt is routed around all of your pulleys and is fully seated in all of the grooves and all of the accessories. If not, the belt itself can work its way off, can shred and cause damage. So at this point here, everything looks like it's in good condition. We're all set. Let's go ahead and install our AC line here. We had popped our bolt right back in place here so we didn't lose it. Go ahead and get that bolt started, and we'll go ahead and snug that down. Perfect. Now we'll go ahead and move our power steering hose clamp back up into place. And once that's on, we'll go ahead and put our reservoir back up and into our retainer here. Snap that into place. Let's go ahead and hang our expansion tank reservoir right here. Just pop that down into place. Now when we started this job, we went ahead and evacuated the power steering fluid from our reservoir. We want to go ahead and replace that. So we're going to open up our cap, go ahead, drop a funnel down in there. You want to go ahead and use the recommended power steering fluid. And there's level here, there's an upper and a lower fluid level here. We're going to go ahead and put it right in the middle. Once that's all set, I'm going to go ahead and remove our funnel, pop our cap on. Now And once you do this here, this is something that you want to go ahead and start up the vehicle, cycle the steering wheel left and right, make sure that this fluid is utilized. If that line or the fluid drops down below that lower level, you want to go ahead and obviously fill that back up again to in between those two spots there. That's a prime spot for that to be. Now at this point here, you want to go ahead and hop in the vehicle, go ahead and start it up. You want to make sure that everything is operational as it should be. Once everything checks out, at that point there, you can go ahead and install your engine cover. Once we get this lined up, we use our screwdriver to lock in our push pins here, our little lock tabs. Now at this point here, we want to go ahead and fill up our radiator, and we're going to fill this up with the recommended coolant from the manufacturer. We're going to fill this right up to the top. Once the radiator is full, we're going to go ahead and put our regular cap back on and seal that up. With our radiator full, I'm going to go ahead and install our radiator cap. Next, we want to come on over to our expansion tank right here. I'm going to open this up. And we want to go ahead and fill this up. There's going to be markings on our tank here that tell us where the full mark is. We're going to go ahead and fill this up to those lines, or to that line. Once we have that filled up, go ahead and remove your funnel, install the cap. You want to go ahead and start up the vehicle. You want to go ahead and let this run for about 10-15 minutes. Allow for the thermostat to open up inside the engine and let that coolant flow. At that point there, check your expansion tank here, and you want to go ahead and add coolant through the expansion tank. Never open up your radiator cap after the vehicle has been running and warmed up. Once you're topped off with the coolant in this, then you should be good for the road.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.